Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to this event. Actually, I was not invited. I made up for a colleague that could make it. I replaced the colleague. Okay, so this is a paper with Viral Acharya, my colleague, Heitor Almeida, my former colleague, and Ping Liu from Purdue. The paper is about the efficiency or resiliency, efficiency and resiliency in terms of financial pressures and operational pressures. So what's new in this paper? We in finance usually talk about the financial commitment of the firm, and we focus on the management of debt risk. So where's the pointer? There's no pointer here. Where? Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. So we talk about the risk of financial default and debt contracts. What do we add to this scenario? We add the risk of default on delivery contract. Companies have two kinds of contracts: the commitment to lenders and the commitment to customers. And the whole paper is the interplay between these two. We study how the firms manage these two commitments and what is the trade-off which is associated with that. So I don't have to tell you, there was COVID-19. There was COVID. Well, the hell with it. There was COVID-19, okay? Inventories were depleted, supply chains did not function, and the firms could not deliver the merchandise that they committed. So the question is, how is the firm's resiliency, its ability to deliver on its commitment to customers, is affected by the capital structure of the firm? And how does the access to liquidity, the cash, or the financial constraint, as we say in finance, is affected corporate resiliency? So the firms face a trade-off. The manager has cash coming in, and the question is what to do with the cash. You can do two things with it. You can build up inventory in case there is a hurricane, earthquake, COVID-19, something like that. You can build excess capacity. You can build supply chains. And it is costly to have supply chains and diversify, one in China, one in India, one in Vietnam, and so on. Or build excess capacity, backup capacity, or hoard the cash so that if there is negative cash flow shock, you can have enough cash to deliver on your financial commitments. So the interplay between these two is what the paper is all about. We propose that higher financial default risk leads to lower operational hedging. That is to say, we have a mismatch here in the model between the financial commitment and the delivery commitment. The financial commitments are immediate. If you default, your life is finished. The delivery commitment comes later. If you have cash coming in, do you want to put it to use it to hedge against the financial commitment so that you don't finish your life early, or you invest in the long run in capacity, supply chains, everything that people talked about? And the main testable result in the paper, I mean, after all the talk and all the model, is does a higher credit spread on debt, which indicates the risk of debt, lead to higher operational spread? Why should there be a higher operational spread? The operational spread of the markup is, in our model, the price minus the marginal cost. Marginal cost declines if you don't invest in supply chains, inventory, etc., etc. If you reduce your investment in operational hedging, marginal cost declines, markup increases. So the question is whether there is a relationship between the credit spread, which is increasing with financial risk, and the markup, which is increasing if you reduce operational hedging. So again, the whole paper is the interplay between the financial hedging and the operational hedging. Now, this trade-off may not hold, however. If there is a well-functioning market, there is ample liquidity, and the firm can borrow against its future deliveries. What happens then? if there is a shortfall in cash, there is a shock, no problem. I don't have to cut anything. I can borrow in a short run, deliver on my financial commitments, and then the merchandise which I'll sell later will be used to pay back the debt. So if I can do that, if I can pledge, and you'll see it formally, if I can pledge the future income and use it to borrow and deliver on my short-term financial commitment, there is no problem. So what we find here is that it depends on the financial constraint of the firm. If you have lower pledgeability, higher financial constraint, then you have a trade-off between, you have to trade off financial commitments and delivery commitments. If there is well-functioning market, there is ample liquidity, you can borrow, there is no such trade-off. In the background, I'll say it again, what the government did in the US, I don't know about elsewhere in the world, during COVID-19 was the right thing. Our model says, provide liquidity, and you will avoid cut down in deliveries. And that's what happened. As you know, we now eat or suffer from the consequence of the inflation, but at that time, there was a huge infusion of liquidity into the economy, and according to our model, if you have this liquidity, you don't have to do the trade-off, you don't have to cut down on deliveries and so on. Okay, here's the formal model. We have 2 periods. In period 1, what happens? You have a given debt level. I should point out that in this model, the debt level and the contract to deliver is a given. We have a sequel. We are trying to optimize F and I, but for now, they are given. So the company inherited a debt contract F that matures in T1 here. It has a contract to deliver capital I, which is deliverable here in period 2. It has cash flow X0, which is realized here. Operational hedging is measured by small I, let us say it's inventory. And the cost is K of I plus I, with marginal cost increasing as usual. What is the cash saved here? It's the X0 here, minus the cost of production, Ki plus I. As you can see, if you do more operational hedging, if you increase I, you increase this term, and X minus K is reduced. If you have less dollars saved, you'll have a problem here. What is the problem here in period 1? In period 1, you have the realization of the X1, the cash flow in period 1, which is some X bar plus U, which is a random variable. If U is very low, what may happen? X0, which you got here, minus the cost that you invested here, plus the cash flow from period 1 is smaller than F. If this happens, you go bankrupt. You finish your life. What if this is higher than that? You continue your life. And then in period 2, you have the following problem. If you have enough to deliver, you have P times I minus capital I plus small I, which is the operational hedging. Now, the shock U affects the cash flow in period 1 and also affects output in period 2. For example, if you have a COVID, your immediate cash flow declines and you have problem delivering in period 2. Delta here expresses operational risk. It is decreasing with U, which means if U is low, delta of U is high, and then there is less left here. So in short, if you have a shock in period 1, cash flow is lower here, output is lower here. If output is lower here, but you prepared enough inventory, you can deliver. And you can deliver and make P times the quantity you deliver plus X2, which is some cash flow in period 2. What happens if you have the bad outcome? This is the good outcome. What happens if you have the bad outcome? The amount available after the shock plus the amount that you hoarded, the inventory, is smaller than what you committed. What happens then? You have a penalty. What is the penalty? Some lambda, which is a loss of franchise value. That is to say, the customers of Apple switch to Samsung. Okay, if you can, this according to the story that you narrated. Okay, so there is a cost here of default, kind of being short on the quantity that you have. So this goes into the modeling, and this determines of course, the penalty here, and the function, the extent of the loss here, the sensitivity of your loss to the shock determines how much you invest in period 0 in I. So you can see how the model works over time, okay? Any question with this? Okay, so we move to the solution. We have a few pages of proof, and here's the solution. What do we have here in the solution? This is the credit spread. This is the face value of we assume that the benchmark yield is 0. So this is the amount that you have to pay, F. This is the market value of the debt. -1 is the yield, or the credit spread. So the credit spread, when it increases, means that you have greater financial risk. If you have greater financial risk, you want to invest less in operational hedging. If you invest less in operational hedging, this declines, and the whole term here, which we call operational spread or markup, increases. This produces a positive relationship between credit spread, which is a financial measure, and operational spread, which is production measure. And we are kind of proud that we connect these two things, the financial spread, which captures one risk, and operational spread, which captures another risk in another market altogether. Now, if the company can pledge a fraction tau, until now I showed you no pledging. 0, tau is 0. I cannot pledge second period cash flows. But if the firm can pledge fraction tau, then it is less constrained. And this is what the scenario I explained before. It has lower financial risk, and operational hedging is more valuable. Why? Even though I may face a risk that in period 1, cash flow will be low and I will not have enough to pay the debt, I'll be able to borrow. And this makes operational hedging more valuable, because then I will invest more in the delivery in period 2. There'll be more to commit and more to borrow, okay? So empirically, we use in the empirical study, I mean, it's not only theory, you have empirical evidence, a lower pledgeability means higher financial constraint. So the prediction is that greater financial constraint, stronger effect of a credit spread on markup. And this is depicted here. Why does it? What I showed you, this is credit spread, this is operational spread. What I showed you is here. Suppose you can pledge 0.8 of second period cash flows. No relationship. I mean, very weak relationship. Suppose you can pledge 0.4, greater relationship. Suppose you can pledge 0. This is what you have. Okay? So as you can see, the relationship between capital credit spread and operational spread is sensitive to the extent of financial constraint. Empirical test. We have 2 research questions. Very clear research question. Does higher credit spread lead to higher operational spread? And the second question, is relationship 1 affected by financial constraint? It's very straightforward. And the hypothesis that markup increases with z-score. Why? Z-score is a measure of credit spread or credit risk. Negative z-score. This is Altman Z. Markup is a proxy. Sales minus cost of goods sold divided by sales is a common proxy for price minus marginal cost. Okay? We use Compustat, 73 to 20. We use z-score. We use control variables, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 control variables, including market power. And we'll talk about it. The fat and happy versus the lean and mean. And the supply chain data comes from a fact set. includes identities of related parties, type of the relationship, and firm's geographical origin. Okay, I'm running. Okay. We use two measures of operational hedging. One is inventory, which runs back to 73, and the one is the data from FactSet, which we have only from 2003, which includes 3 variables here. And we do principal component analysis. We use a combination of these 3 variables. What are they? Number of suppliers, number of supplier regions, and number of supplier out of the region, okay? So we have a combination, a measure, which combines all 3 of them, okay? So we use the first principal component. We also use ranking, but actually in the revision we threw it out because the results are the same, so there is no point in having them. And the question, the testable question is, does the markup, sales minus cost of goods sold divided by sales, increases, which is a measure of operational hedging, is it affected by the our measures of operational hedging? This is to legitimize or to validate the fact that markup is a measure of operational hedging. Let's look at the result. This is markup, this is supply chain hedging, and this is inventory. According to our model, if you invest more in supply chain hedging, marginal cost rises. If you invest more in inventory, marginal cost rises. If marginal cost rises, price minus marginal cost declines. This is what we get here. As you can see, it's negative and significant. We use quarterly data. As I said, from 1973, we have 116,000 observations. So bottom line, markup declines with higher spending on supply chain hedging. So the conclusion is markup is a reasonable summary of measures of a firm's operational hedging. Now, we don't capture everything. The company also invests in excess labor, and the company also invests in excess capacity. So we don't have all the measures of operational hedging, but these 2 measures are correlated with operational hedging, okay? And it's the same if we use the principal component or the rank, it's the same, okay? So this is the main test. The main test is, I'm still okay, right?
Yeah.
You looked.
You have,
no, yeah.
No, actually you have
Okay.
more.
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay, so good, thank you. So the main test is, does markup, which is our measure of operational hedging, does it increase with a credit spread or financial risk? The answer is yes, positive and significant. What do? We have a panel regression, firm fixed effect, year-quarter fixed effect. We have 7 control variables, and we have negative z-score. The higher the negative z-score, the higher the financial risk. And what do we find? The higher the financial risk, the higher the markup. Meaning, if markup is higher, the investment in operational hedging is lower. And there is this trade-off. This indicates the trade-off. We follow it up. This is in the paper which is published, and people told us markup is price minus marginal cost. You take price as given. What if it is not given? Why don't you focus directly on cost of goods sold, which we do. So cost of goods sold divided by asset, it's not in the paper, but it will be in the next version. The coefficient is negative, meaning if negative z-score rises, if credit risk rises, you invest less in operational hedging. Cost of goods sold declines here, okay? Now, about financial constraint. According to our model, this relationship is stronger if there is financial constraint. If there is no financial constraint, I'll repeat, you can borrow if you have a shortfall of cash in period 1 and pledge your deliveries from period 2. So how do we measure financial constraint? Whited Wu has a well-known measure, but there is a recent paper by, there is a paper by Riddick and Whited, I think 19, I'm not sure the year is correct, doing textual analysis of statements by managers And they related these measures of financial constraint from textual analysis to common measures. They found that the relationship of the textual financial constraint to weighted Wu measure is not strong. What was the number one variable that they found is related to financial constraint? It is the level of cash that manager is holding. The idea here, I don't know about the financial constraint of the firm, but the manager knows. So the manager, knowing that the firm is financial constraint, the manager is hoarding cash and holding excess cash. And this is an indication, this is not financial constraint, this is an indication about what the manager thinks about the future of the company. In our model, I should say, by our model, firms will, with lower pledgeability, also hold more cash. So we don't observe pledgeability, but we observe cash. Now, cash is held for two reasons. One is to hedge the shortfall, and one is to hedge against volatility in cash coming in and going out. So we take out this effect. This was highlighted by Opler, Stoltz, and all the other papers on cash holdings. So we take in every quarter the level of cash to assets. We regress it on volatility of cash flows, cash to asset, the firm's volatility standard deviation, and the industry standard deviation. Okay. We take the residuals. The residual from that is our measure of financial constraint. The high residual value, high financial constraint. Low residual value, low financial constraint. We split in each quarter the companies by two according to higher or low, above or below the median. And we look at the next quarter, not the current quarter, but the next quarter. What do we find? If you have high residual cash, strong relationship between markup and negative z-score. Low residual cash, no effect. This supports our view. The positive relationship between operational hedging and financial hedging is, the negative relationship. The positive relationship between markup, the operational spread and the credit spread holds only for companies which are financially constrained. But you know, these days you cannot sell any product like that. You need to have an exogenous event. Panel regressions don't sell anymore. So we have it, okay? You'll see it, okay? So just, this is not in the paper, but it'll be in the revision. And this relates to the fat and happy story of Gordon. There is a paper by Chevalier and Sharfstein and Gilchrist in AER 2017 suggesting that firms with market power in times of a shock, if they are vulnerably financially, they raise their prices. And they face the following trade-off. If I raise the price, which I'm able to do because I have market power, I'll have immediate cash, and I'll forgo the future market share, okay? So I rather have the cash immediately and not worry about market share in the future. So therefore, they say, the relationship between markup and negative z-score is due to market power. We find the opposite. This is the alternative hypothesis to our story. It's not there. We have z-score, we have market power, and we have their interaction. You expect this to be positive. That is to say, the effect of a financial vulnerability on markup should be stronger for companies with stronger market power. It's the opposite. And we measure market power in two different ways. So the alternative story to our story is debunked. The fat and happy,
they suffer.
Well, yes, suffer. Yes, actually, yes, you're right. Yeah, actually, you're right. The fat and happy suffer. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. We do it for recessions. These are periods. I'm close to the end. I told you we have two shocks. One is NBR recessions. We have 6 recessions since 1973. So we look at markup. The relationship between markup and z-score is stronger in recession. Why? These are periods where liquidity is low. where the financial markets are not functioning well. It's harder to pledge future income. Inventory, you cut it more, you cut operational hedging more in recessions if you have higher Z. And finally, we use the financial crisis of 2008. We use, in the interest of speed, I'll jump to the results. Okay? So what is the story here? Chodorov Reich in the QJE 2014 has a paper showing that companies whose lender were shocked, like they had business with Lehman, or they had the toxic assets, or they had to cut loans, if their relationship bank was hurt, they laid off more employees. This is the paper in QJE. What we do, we use his data, and we say, if the company's lender was shocked, it means the company suddenly became financially constrained. It has nothing to do with the business of the company. It is the lender of the company that became shocked because it did business with Lehman. So let's look at Lehman here, Lehman exposure. Okay? So what happens? We said that there is a positive relationship between markup and Z-score. And we said that this relationship is stronger when the company is financially constrained. Here it is, lender exposure. The lender of the company in 2008 became shocked because of Lehman. It doesn't provide the liquidity to the company. The company must cut on its operational hedging. What is the reflection of that? If it cuts on operational hedging, markup goes up. So if the company was vulnerable financially, its markup went up. And this Chodorov Reich has two other measures: loan reduction, ABX. This is toxic asset exposure, and we find the same. You know, you do diff and diff. You always have this beautiful picture. You see. It follows the textbook. Okay, 0. This is it, conclusion. I showed you with conclusion, and what is, okay, so, okay, I don't have to repeat it. What is the macro takeaway? Over-leveraging of the economy reduces its resilience. Let's see. Reduces its resilience, and a liquid, well-functioning capital market, higher pledgeability, weaker relationship between financial hedging and operational hedging. And as I said before, indeed, the increase in liquidity in COVID-19 was the right policy measure according to our model. Thank you. Okay. I'll just get out of this. Close current tabs. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Alisa. All right. Thank you, Marsonta and Alvin, for inviting me to discuss Yakov's paper. And this is the last week of my employment at the Stockholm School of Economics, and I'm very happy to spend the week at the great conference. And it's my great pleasure to discuss the paper by Yakov, Viral, Hider, and Ping. All right, so the paper studies corporate policies between financial and operational hedging. As Yakov nicely put in his presentation, financial hedging in the paper means cash savings. And operational hedging takes the form of inventory, excess capacity, or diversification in the supply chain. All right, so the paper has a model which generated an insight that when firms face limitations on the budget constraint in allocating resources, then there would be a substitution between the resource that is spent in cash saving and the resource that is spent in operational hedging. And then they derived the testable implication for the empirical test, which is a positive relationship between the credit spread and the operational spread. All right, so the intuition of the model is very nicely summarized in their timeline of in the paper. And what you can see here is that the firm has an asset in place. They have a supply contract for which the firm needs to make a delivery at time 2. And the firm has existing debt, which is going to mature at time 1. And the shock against which firms need to hedge is realized in time 1, which affect the cash flow, the liquidity, the liquid asset firms have to pay back the debt at time 1, and also production disruption at time 2. All right? So here, because the debt is going to mature first, the firm needs to prioritize their financial distress, because if they do not have enough liquid assets to pay back the fixed amount of debt, the firm is going to forgo the franchise value at time 2 and the potential revenue they can generate from their supply contract. All right? And then, if the firm cannot make enough products in order to be delivered to their customer, they are going to face operational default. When it occurs, there will be a penalty. You can think of this in the context of stockout costs or any deadweight costs that is going to be incurred in time 2. And also, as Yakov nicely summarized in his presentation, here in the model, financial hedging and operational hedging will play different roles in resisting against the financial shock, financial default risk versus operational default risk. Because here, when firms have more financial hedging in the form of cash holding, what it means is that it will reduce the risk of financial default at time 1, but since there is a budget constraint, it means that the firm will have lower inventory for time 2, which results in a higher risk for operational default. And also, cash is not going to help the firm in resisting against the operational default at time 2, because the firm needs time to build their production and to produce the goods. All right? And operational hedging works in a different way, because if the firm have more inventory, for example, it will reduce the risk of operational default at time 2. But again, since there is a budget constraint, they will have less resource in cash saving, so it will increase the risk of financial default. So this is the tension of the paper. All right, to summarize the key drivers of the model is that the firm has a fixed financial obligation. It has a fixed supply contract, and normally this is referred to as a purchasing obligation. And also there is a mismatch between the maturity of the liability and the payoff of the assets, and there's time to build, and also we need the low pledgeability of future cash flow in paying for the current debt. All right, so I like a lot of the paper because it studies an extremely relevant question, especially connecting to yesterday's discussion. This is very relevant. And it has a very intuitive and insightful model, which generates a number of important implications for our understanding of the risk that we are facing in today's world. And my comment is going to be centered around the pledgeability of future cash flow, the role of inventory for financially constrained firms, and I will also talk about the empirical prediction as well as more implications from the model. All right, so let me start from the pledgeability of future cash flow. Yakov and authors acknowledge in the paper that if the firm could pledge the sales contract at time 2 in order to pay back the debt that they have at time 1, basically the tension between operational hedging and financial hedging will go away. And this seemed to be very likely. Why? Because in the model, if we narrowly take the assumption as given, the shock realized at time 1. So for how much the firm is going to produce at time 2, we know exactly how much revenue they can generate. So for example, if the firm talk to a financier and use the cash flow to borrow against the debt, it is feasible. And they can also use the working capital to borrow and pay back the debt at time 1. And also, they can also borrow from the customers. Say, if you advance the payment, I can deliver the good to you, because the customer will also have an interest to receive the goods. So if the pledgeability indeed plays a very, very important role in testing the implications from the model. All right, so the paper indeed is providing the evidence on this cross-sectional variation, because most of the results are going to be expected if pledgeability is low. However, the measure that they're using is a high residual cash. I know there are a lot of motivation for why the residue of cash holding is going to capture financial constraint from the firm's perspective, from the manager's perspective. But when we map it to your model, it's going to connect both the pledgeability and also the financial default, as well as financial hedging that you are using. So it's going to capture both things in one measure, and it's a bit complicated to distinguish which one is driving the result. And also you have another shock, and also to look at the recession, but related to my comment 2, which I'm going to talk about later. This is about, your model is about optimal hedging when expecting there might be financial constraint. But when it comes to recession and the realization of the shock, depletion of inventory is actually not as planned by the firm. So there will be a different interpretation. What I would suggest is that there are ex-ante measures for financial constraint rather than cash holdings. For example, size, credit ratings, which could tell more about the information asymmetry firms may have, even when they have cash flow against their borrowing, but they cannot do so as much as they want. Okay, and also since the firm could obtain financing from the customer, you can also use this dimension to generate how easy it is to obtain trade credit from the customer and to test your model's prediction. I think it will also give you a very nice angle to test your model. All right, then secondly, there is a different way to mitigate the financial default at time 1. Suppose the firm have the inventory at time 1. It could be raw material, it could be some finished good that they have already produced, but they haven't talked to the customer and to arrange the delivery. In case the firm do not have enough liquidity, liquid assets to make the payment, what they can do is that they can sell inventory to generate more cash flow and use the internal cash flow to pay back the debt. This is possible even if financiers are constrained, because they don't need to raise any additional external financing from the external market. And this insight is indeed what I show in the paper with Sudipto Dasgupta and Erica Lee, that financially constrained firms, they actively use inventory to generate internal cash flow, and they do so more aggressively in the times when they have unfavorable shocks. All right, and then related to the benefit and the cost of holding inventory and depleting inventory, there are 2 additional benefits from our paper. One is that if you also allow firms to sell the asset in place, then comparing selling assets versus selling inventory is much cheaper because it takes lower cost to adjust the capital. And also, when the production cost is time varying, then firms could hold more inventory and produce more goods when the production cost is low, and then they can make use of the additional inventory they hold when the times go sour. And this also explains why financial constrained firms hold more inventory on average. All right. My next comment was about the empirical relationship between the higher leverage and the higher operational spread, which you capture with your markup. And I do agree that with markup, the benefit is that you can use one measure to capture different dimensions of operational hedging. But your argument, if we take it from the beginning, from the higher credit risk, then firms need to have a higher cash holding. And then this will result in lower operational hedging, lower production costs, higher operational spread. What you eventually will go to is that it will mean that the firm have a higher risk of operational default, for example, a lower market share. And I mentioned the Chevalier and the Sharpston paper because the version that you sent to me didn't include it. And now I see that you have it. And what I suggest that you to test is indeed what you have done. So controlling for markup is not enough. You need to split the example. And I see that you have supporting evidence. And let me finish by saying that there are a lot of broader implications one could learn from the paper. For example, this fixed supply contract, what is the benefit and cost of it? The operational default incurs because the firm has committed to make the delivery. And then Heater and also co-authors has another paper which shows that firms are using this kind of forward contract as a way to substitute derivative hedging. And then your paper can add to potential costs of this contract to suppliers. And also your debt can be generalized to more fixed costs like wage, fixed operating costs, and operational hedging could also be think of in the broader contents. For example, R&D, advertisement, which uses short-term resources but generate long-term gain. So let me finish here. Thank you very much.
I have two comments, actually. Okay. You want to read it? No. Yeah. So I am surprised that you do so much robustness on the financial constraints, and I would say that we would all agree that the credit spread capture a credit a risk premium, right? But much less on the profit margin, the markup. And there, if I believe Gordon measures that the product I markup comes from low sustainability, this is not necessarily operational risk. So I would look at the effect as post. Do we see higher volatility of sales for these companies that do less operational hedging according to your model? Do we see that they lose customers more often? So higher customer turnover? I would find that very convincing even without exogenous variation. Okay. That's, yeah. That,
okay. So the next version preempts this and preempts also the comment. Thank you, Dong, for your comments. I would say that you're right about the ability to use inventory, to liquidate assets. But we know from Schleifer and Vishny that there is fire sale discount. And a fire sale discount is tantamount to have low pledgeability. You need to have some cost if you are short of cash. So the way we do it, we limit the pledgeability. We could add a discount for any given I inventory that you have. You will be able to sell it for a large discount. It would produce qualitatively exactly the same results. This is to say, the greater the discount, the greater the trade-off between operational spread and financial spread. So in our case, the smaller the pledgeability, the greater the positive relationship between operational spread and financial spread. I could say exactly the same result. The greater the discount from liquidating asset and liquidating inventory, again, the greater the positive. So the result would be qualitatively the same. We'll have another term for a fire sale of inventory in case you are short of cash. Now, what you say is absolutely correct. And in the next version, we have not only the effect of actually, I have it in the slides which I prepared in case I'm asked that, but we don't have time for that. Not volatility, but the level of sales. So we looked at the shock to sales as a function of the inventory in financial recessions. And we ask ourselves, is it true that inventory provides operational hedging? That is to say, in case of a shock, you have to reduce your sales by less if you have higher inventory. So we do exactly the same analysis. The dependent variable is change in sales. The explanatory variable is Z, a negative Z-score times the recession dummy. And we have it for inventory. And we find that the greater the inventory, the smaller the shock to sales. Because we started the study before we had the COVID data. We don't have it for COVID. But I assume the same holds for COVID. That is to say, the firms that invested ex ante more in inventory suffered a smaller decline in sales during COVID. Those that had like just-in-time inventory were very efficient ex ante, suffered greater decline in sales. It's like you said, in good times they had good margins. In bad times, when the chips were down, they suffered in your case in sales, and this is what we find also.
Questions?
Yes.
Nick.
Yes, Nick.
Great paper. It's a fantastic discussion as well. I was going to ask, if in the model and just empirically, if you have variation and uncertainty, wouldn't both financial and operational hedging move positively together?
Yes, in our model, the shock lowers cash flows and inflicts a loss on output in period 2. Let us say COVID, you have an immediate.
So I just say different. U has a sigma. It's the volatility of U. So
No, we don't have.
I know you don't have it, but I'm saying in reality that varies. So if you generalize the model, in reality, you know this for your finance.
Okay. The sigma, you're right. The sigma of U will enter. We integrate over the distribution of U in our solutions. So naturally, we don't have it directly. We don't have a comparative static relative to the sigma of U. But naturally, the distribution of U affects the ex ante decision. Could be the problem with sigma, you don't know the distribution of U. So does it?
Yeah, sure. I just as a
right.
Intuitively.
Yeah.
I mean that's all correct.
But if
U itself will vary, I just out of interest.
No, you say a sigma U will vary. You say. No, I'm saying the sigma U. I mean, the greater the distribution of U, it will affect the ex ante solution.
Sure.
Now, yes.
Just to rephrase a little bit, I think like if you increase empirically, you have an increase in uncertainty. So if you have an increase in uncertainty, you would expect both operational and financial hedging to increase. So if you could empirically maybe control for risk to kind of see whether constant for a given risk, then you would see the relationship that you have.
Could be. Yeah, for sure. But the question is, we are agnostic about the distribution of U. If you have like a, mean preserving increase in uncertainty, look, if we assume normality, it'll be very simple. We have 2 parameters, it's easy. But U may not be normal,
No, I think like it's more about, correct me if I misinterpreted your question, but I think that it's more of disentangling in the data, making your effect stronger. Because I think like now you may be modeling a movement between both types of hedging that it's driven by the uncertainty.
You say maybe you should parameterize the distribution of U, and then do a comparative static with respect to the parameters of U.
Yeah, if I can add to this, I would interpret what they are saying, that in the time series, the result is probably hardwired, but the result should come from the cross-section.
Okay.
That's.
Okay. Okay, we have one cross-section, which is, the one cross-section is in the 2008 shock, which is pure cross-section. It's not time series, it's not panel, it's just the cross-section across firms in the shock. But yes, this is a good thing. I mean, actually, good suggestion, whether the parameter of the uncertainty affects both operational hedging and financial hedging.
Okay, I guess that we can continue this discussion over coffee, and we resume at 11. Thanks a lot, everyone.